In the early hours of August 17th, 1952, an entire American town vanished. Not abandoned, not evacuated, vanished. 679 people disappeared without a single survivor. And according to official reports, the earth itself swallowed the town whole. This is the story of Ashley, Kansas, a town that no longer exists. At exactly 3:28 a.m. on August 17, 1952, the United States Geological Survey recorded a massive earthquake measuring 7.9 in magnitude. The tremor was felt across Kansas and throughout much of the Midwest. But when authorities traced the epicenter, they discovered something impossible. The earthquake had originated directly beneath the small farming community of Ashley, Kansas. When state law enforcement finally reached the area, they found no town, no homes, no roads, no people, only a gigantic burning fissure in the earth, stretching nearly 1,000 yards long and 500 yards wide. Its depth was never determined. Every one of Ashley's 679 residents was declared dead, but the truly horrifying part of the story was what happened before the town disappeared. Because for 8 days leading up to the disaster, the residents of Ashley reported impossible phenomena, and somehow, every warning was ignored. August 8th, 1952, 7:13 p.m. A resident named Gabriel Jonathan contacted the police station in nearby Hays, Kansas. Ashley had no official police department of its own. Gabriel sounded terrified. He claimed there was a black opening in the sky above the town, not a storm cloud, not smoke, an opening. Within minutes, dozens of calls flooded the Hays police station. Every caller described the exact same thing. A dark hole suspended in the sky over Ashley. And strangely, no neighboring towns could see it. Police decided to send an officer the next morning. What happened next only deepened the mystery. August 9th, 7:54 a.m. Officer Alan Mace radioed dispatch while driving toward Ashley. His voice reportedly sounded confused, disturbed. According to Mace, he had followed the only road leading into Ashley exactly as normal. The road never curved, never changed direction. But somehow, it led him back to Hays, again and again. 7 police cars were eventually sent to investigate. Every officer reported the same impossible result. The road to Ashley no longer reached Ashley. It simply looped back to Hays. Meanwhile, the calls from Ashley continued. Residents claimed the black opening in the sky was growing larger. Police instructed everyone to stay inside and avoid travel unless absolutely necessary. But by then, it may already have been too late. That same evening, Mrs. Elaine Cantor reported her neighbors missing. The Milton family, a husband, a wife, and their 2 children. Earlier that night, they had attempted to leave Ashley by car. They were never seen again. No vehicle ever emerged from the road. No wreckage was discovered. They simply vanished. Then came August 10th, and things became even worse. At 7:38 a.m., residents called Hays in a panic. The sun had never risen. Ashley was completely engulfed in darkness. A helicopter was dispatched later that morning to locate the town from the air, but the pilot reported something chilling. Ashley could not be found. From above, the town simply wasn't there. On August 11th, the phone calls became disturbing in an entirely new way. A woman named Phoebe Danielowski called police shortly after noon. She claimed her daughter Erica was speaking to her dead father, a man who had died 3 years earlier in a drunk driving accident. But that wasn't the terrifying part. According to Phoebe, Erica kept trying to walk outside into the darkness, saying she wanted to join them. Over the next 12 hours, Hundreds of similar calls poured into the station. Children throughout Ashley claimed they were hearing voices, seeing dead relatives, speaking to people who no longer existed. Then, during the night of August 12th, every child in Ashley disappeared. All 217 of them gone. Parents flooded the police station with desperate phone calls, 421 calls in total, but there was nothing authorities could do. No roads reached Ashley anymore, and from the air, the town still could not be located. The residents were completely isolated, alone inside the darkness. On August 13th, another horrifying phenomenon appeared. An elderly man named Scott Luntz reported seeing a distant fire in the south. But according to him, the fire wasn't on the ground. It was in the sky. Residents described enormous red and orange flames burning through the darkness above the town. And throughout the day, the fire appeared to move closer. No neighboring communities saw anything, only Ashley. Then, just after midnight on August 14th, the final call came in. A man named Benjamin Endicott contacted the Hayes Police Department. He said the fire had become so bright, it looked like daytime. The recording from that call still exists. Just hold on. Wait. Silence. Yeah. I see something. It's to the south. It looks like the call disconnected. And for nearly 2 days, nothing. No phone calls, no contact, only silence. Until the night of August 15th, the final transmission from Ashley, Kansas, at 9:46 p.m. Officer Peter Welsh answered a phone call from a woman named April Foster. Her voice was shaking, weak, terrified. She begged for help. Then she said something impossible. They came back. Officer Welsh asked who she meant. April began sobbing. Everyone. She claimed the missing children had returned. So had the dead. Burned figures were walking through the streets of Ashley, calling out to people, looking for them. April said she saw her own son outside, but her son had died the year before, hit by a car while riding his bicycle. According to April, he stood outside her house, burned beyond recognition, calling for his mother. She claimed people who opened their doors were dragged away, screaming, their homes collapsing into flames moments later. Then suddenly, during the phone call, glass shattered. Something had entered her home. The recording captured faint footsteps. And then, a child's voice. "Mommy!" April began crying uncontrollably. Officer Welsh told her not to move, not to make a sound. Then came heavy footsteps, laughter, and finally, the words that would become infamous in the case file. "I found you, Mommy." The rest of the tape was drowned in screaming, then silence. The next morning, law enforcement arrived at the location of Ashley, Kansas, but there was no town, no bodies, no buildings. Nothing remained except the burning fissure in the earth. 12 days later, the search for Ashley's missing residents was officially abandoned. But that same night, another earthquake struck, magnitude 7.5, again centered directly beneath Ashley. And when authorities returned the following morning, the fissure had closed, as if nothing had ever been there. Ashley, Kansas, was gone forever, and to this day, no official explanation has ever been given. Some believe the town fell into the earth during the earthquakes. Others believe the residents experienced mass hysteria. But according to the surviving recordings, something was inside the darkness above Ashley, watching, waiting, and eventually, it came down. New York City, summer, 1954. The heat was unbearable. The air conditioning barely worked, and private investigator Raymond Gibson was already thinking about closing his office early when a woman walked through the door and changed everything. Her name was Emily Lloyd. Elegant dress, perfect makeup, calm voice, but behind her appearance, she was terrified. Her sister Rita had disappeared 3 days earlier. Normally, that wouldn't have been unusual. Rita was known for vanishing with wealthy men for days at a time, before suddenly returning home. But earlier that afternoon, Emily received a phone call from the morgue. Police believed they had found Rita's body. And suddenly, this no longer felt like an ordinary disappearance. Raymond and his partner, Brian McKenna, agreed to take the case immediately. Brian stayed with Emily, while Raymond headed to the morgue to speak with Detective O'Halloran. Inside the cold storage room, Raymond finally saw Rita Lloyd, beautiful even in death. But something about the body was wrong. There were no gunshot wounds, no stab wounds, no visible injuries at all, except for a massive puncture wound in her neck and a strange bite mark on her leg. Detectives admitted they had never seen anything like it before. Not even the veterinarians could identify what caused the bite. Raymond felt a cold chill run through his body. Something about this case didn't feel human. That night, Raymond returned to Brian's apartment and broke the news to Emily. She didn't scream, didn't panic. She simply lowered her head and quietly cried, as if she already knew her sister was gone. A few hours later, there was a knock at the door. 2 police officers stood outside. Brian McKenna had been murdered, shot dead only hours after taking the case. Raymond accompanied police to the morgue to identify Brian's body. But when the attendant opened the drawer, it was empty. At first, they assumed there had been another labeling mistake. Then someone checked Rita's drawer. It, too, was empty. The room exploded into chaos. 2 corpses had vanished from a locked morgue without explanation. And suddenly, Raymond realized this case had become far more dangerous than he imagined. The investigation led Raymond and Emily to a wealthy man named Clarence Varner. According to Emily, Rita had spent time with him shortly before her death. Varner owned an expensive home in New York, but when Raymond visited it, nobody answered. The deeper he dug into Varner's past, the stranger things became. No one seemed to know much about him, and every lead ended in silence. Eventually, Raymond tracked Varner to an isolated house in Ellenville, New York, an old, decaying property surrounded by overgrown grass and the smell of something rotten. Raymond knew instantly something was wrong with the place. The following morning, Raymond entered the house alone while Emily waited in the car. After forcing his way inside, he heard movement upstairs, and what he found there would haunt him forever. Standing in the hallway were Rita Lloyd and Brian McKenna, dead, but moving. Their skin was pale gray, their eyes dark red, and both of them still wore the white sheets from the morgue. The smell of rotting flesh filled the hallway. Behind them stood Clarence Varner, smiling calmly. Varner claimed Raymond's world was doomed, that something ancient was coming. Then he gave a single order: kill him. The 2 corpses slowly began moving toward Raymond. At first he froze in shock. Brian had been his friend, but there was nothing human left inside either of them. Only empty eyes and hunger. Raymond barely escaped them and climbed into the attic above the hallway, and there he discovered the truth. Clarence Varner stood beside a massive ancient book, chanting in a language Raymond couldn't understand. Near him sat a large cage, holding a dark animal-like creature with enormous teeth. But the worst thing in the room was the hole, a swirling opening floating in midair, a portal. And it was growing larger every second. Objects around the attic slowly began getting pulled toward it. Varner laughed as Raymond stared in horror. "It's a gateway," he said. "He is coming." Varner claimed the portal would allow ancient beings from another world to enter Earth. And according to him, once the opening became large enough, humanity would be destroyed. Realizing there was no time left, Raymond attacked him. The 2 men fought violently beside the growing portal, while the attic shook around them. Finally, Raymond grabbed Varner and forced him toward the opening. Varner screamed as the portal pulled him inside. Seconds later, the gateway collapsed. The attic became silent. And downstairs, the bodies of Rita and Brian finally dropped lifelessly to the floor. When Raymond stepped outside, the entire sky had gone dark. Emily stared upward in fear. A total solar eclipse had begun. Suddenly everything made sense. The ritual, the strange wounds, the corpses, the portal. Varner had been preparing for the eclipse all along. Months later, Raymond finally examined the ancient book he had taken from the house. Inside were instructions for opening gateways, summoning creatures, and contacting ancient beings hidden somewhere beyond human understanding. The final page contained one terrifying detail. The ritual only worked during a total solar eclipse, and according to Raymond's notes, another eclipse was coming soon. It was spring. The sun was shining. Birds echoed through the woods behind our house, and back then, my brother Damon and I thought those woods were harmless. We spent almost every day there. Deep inside stood an old treehouse our father had built years earlier. Damon loved sitting inside, sketching birds and animals for hours, while I explored deeper into the forest looking for strange things. Sometimes I'd find old toys, broken objects. Once, I even found a single red shoe buried in the dirt. At the time, I thought it was cool. Now, I wish I had stayed away from those woods completely. One evening, Dad came home late from work. He was a police officer, and that night, he looked exhausted. He told Mom about a missing woman and her young daughter. Both had disappeared while driving through the northern woods near our town. Police were searching for their white car, but had found nothing. Dad promised he'd continue the search the next morning. None of us realized those woods were already hiding something terrible. That night, around 1:30 a.m., I woke up to a strange sound outside my bedroom window. Dragging. Slow, heavy dragging through the woods, branches snapping, leaves crunching. At first I thought it was an animal, but something about it felt wrong. Too slow, too deliberate, and somehow human. The sound eventually faded deeper into the darkness, but I never went back to sleep. The next day, Damon and I returned to the treehouse. While he sat inside sketching, I wandered farther into the woods alone. That's when I found it. A torn piece of light blue fabric covered in dark red stains. Blood. Even as a kid, I knew that's what it was. Suddenly, the missing woman from Dad's story felt very real. Later that evening, I fell asleep on the couch, and I had a nightmare. A tall figure stood between the trees, thin beyond human proportions, wearing a black suit. Its arms moved unnaturally, almost like ribbons floating underwater, and worst of all, it had no face. When I woke up, Damon was gone. I found him inside the treehouse sketching furiously, but this time, his drawings were different. No birds, no animals, only the same tall, faceless figure over and over again. And behind every drawing, a strange symbol, a circle with an X through it. When I asked Damon who he was drawing, he looked confused. "I don't know," he whispered. That night, Dad returned home with terrible news. Police had finally found the missing woman's car deep in the woods. The windows were smashed, the front of the car was crushed, and there was blood everywhere. But no bodies, no sign of the mother or child. I finally told Dad about the bloody fabric I found earlier that day. The moment I described it, the expression on his face completely changed. For the first time in my life, I saw fear in my father's eyes. That same night, at exactly 1:27 a.m., something tapped against my bedroom window. Slowly, repeatedly, I looked outside and froze. A tall figure stood in the darkness, black suit, long, unnatural limbs, and no face. One thin hand pressed against the glass. I tried waking Damon, but before I could even speak, everything went black. When I opened my eyes again, I was deep in the woods. The faceless man stood beside me. His voice sounded like a whisper inside my head. Then suddenly, I felt something carving into my chest, burning into my skin. At the same time, memories flooded my mind. Family moments, childhood memories, and hidden inside every single one, standing silently among the trees, was him, watching us. The entire time. Then he handed me a white mask with black markings around the eyes and mouth, and said something I'll never forget. "Wear it when you see me." Before I blacked out again, I noticed shapes hanging from the trees around us. Toys, dolls, and two human figures suspended high above the forest floor. One adult, one child, both female. The next morning, Damon stared at me in terror. He claimed he saw me walking through the woods during the night beside the faceless figure. When I lifted my shirt, the same symbol from Damon's drawings had been carved deep into my chest, a circle with an X through the center. But somehow, the wound never bled. Later that day, Dad disappeared. One of his fellow officers came to our house asking if we had seen him. He never arrived at the station that morning. And suddenly, everything around us started falling apart. That night, the tapping returned. 1:31 a.m. The faceless man waited outside my window once again. This time, I followed him willingly. I put on the mask and stepped into the woods. Long black tendrils stretched from his back as he carried me deeper into the forest. Eventually, we reached a clearing, and hanging from the trees were the missing woman and her daughter, still alive, barely conscious. The faceless man lowered them gently before taking me toward an abandoned building hidden deep in the woods. Inside waited another child wearing a yellow hoodie and a black mask. Then the faceless man handed both of us knives and calmly said one word: training. The little girl was placed inside a room alone with me. Everything after that became blurry. The last thing I clearly remember was her terrified hazel eyes staring at me. Then silence. When I regained awareness, the knife was buried in her chest, and somehow I felt nothing. No guilt, no sadness, only satisfaction. As dawn approached, the faceless man carried us back home. The other masked child walked silently beside me the entire way. When we finally reached the house, he removed his hood, and underneath it was Damon, my own brother. And that's when I realized the horrifying truth. The woods behind our house never belonged to us. They belonged to him.